A genius programmer targets a woman he deems his perfect match and manipulates her into falling in love with him. In a dimly lit, sparsely furnished room in Montreal, Francesca paces back and forth with a concerned look on her face. A moment later, David arrives and casually places a set of keys on the table. He barely acknowledges her before proceeding to set up a mini golf game for what's supposed to be their first date. When she insists she isn't in the mood, he grabs her by the arm as if to force her to participate. As David resumes setting up the game, Francesca decides to make her move. She grabs the golf club he brought and with much force, strikes him on the head, knocking him out. Wasting no time, she snatches the keys from the table and races to the door. Her hands shake as she tries each key, desperate to escape. Unfortunately, David recovers in time to prevent her from leaving. The next morning, Francesca wakes from a nightmare. Across the room, David quietly paints a shirt, seemingly unperturbed. Casually, he remarks that her dream must have been exciting. Still visibly shaken, Francesca firmly denies it. David then references the previous night's incident, mockingly declaring that future dates will no longer include anything she might use as a weapon. When he asks if she's excited about the day's plans, Francesca responds with desperation, challenging whether he truly believes his manipulative scheme will work. David had, in fact, taken Francesca 2 days prior, with the disturbing intent of forcing her to fall in love with him. The kidnapper tries to downplay his actions, comparing them to how men in bars manipulate women into sleeping with them. The captive then fires back, saying even questionable bar encounters are better than being abducted. Unmoved, David claims he's doing her a favor, arguing that finding love isn't easy. When Francesca insists she's content being alone, he dismisses it as self-deception. Pleased with their exchange, he smugly remarks that their conversation feels like progress. Upon rising from his seat, David suddenly removes his shirt. Alarmed, Francesca cautiously asks what he's about to do. To her surprise, he simply pulls on the newly painted shirt, adding that he designed it just for her. When he turns to leave and prepare breakfast, she finally sees what he wrote on the shirt. Francesca could only roll her eyes in frustration at the blatant mockery of her predicament. At the dining area, David excitedly places a plate of food in front of Francesca. For him, this is going to be their second date. He expresses hope she'll eat this time, as she spat the food back in his face the first time he tried to feed her. As he starts eating, David tries to spark a lighthearted conversation, but Francesca remains visibly upset. She then goes on to vent her disdain for him. In response, David reaches for the pepper and intentionally tips her juice, spilling it onto her plate. Upset at losing her first proper meal since her abduction, she fumes as David offers a fake apology while cleaning the mess. When Francesca accidentally spills her juice moments later, David seizes the chance to lighten the mood by mimicking her earlier reaction. A faint, unexpected smile escapes her, but she quickly suppresses it, unwilling to give him the satisfaction. Still, her brief smile is enough to prompt a triumphant grin from David as he hands her his plate of food. Moments later, he gets up to leave, promising more fun activities ahead. That night, David returns to find Francesca reading the books he provided earlier. Holding a radio, he excitedly announces their third date, salsa dancing. When she refuses, he pointedly reminds her of the rules he laid out on her first day in captivity. On the day David abducted Francesca, he explained that throughout their time together, they would partake in activities typically done by couples. To assert his control, he gave her 2 choices. She could either do everything he'll tell her, or be tied to the bed with her mouth taped shut until she agreed to cooperate. When David urges Francesca to dance, she tries to excuse herself, claiming she lacks the right shoes. Having already anticipated this, he reveals a pair of salsa shoes he bought for her. With no escape, Francesca reluctantly starts dancing with him. She follows his lead half-heartedly, but when he introduces a step that requires hand-holding, she immediately refuses. David subsequently reminds her of their initial conversation and the consequences of non-compliance. They then continue dancing, now including the hand-holding step. As the lesson progresses, however, Francesca starts putting in more effort, and signs of enjoyment begin to show in her movements. Afterward, David offers Francesca a drink, but she declines. Still, she lets him sit beside her, knowing she has no choice. David then seizes the moment to downplay her concerns, insisting the situation isn't as dire as she thinks. Vehemently disagreeing, Francesca reminds him his actions are actually criminal. To ease her frustration, she eventually takes a shot of the drink he offered. David then cracks a joke about their situation, and despite her irritation, Francesca lets out a reluctant chuckle. In a rare moment of vulnerability, David claims he wasn't always unhinged. He proceeds to share a tale of a pit bull attack at age 10 that supposedly left holes in his skull. When he invites Francesca to feel the scars, she hesitantly reaches out. However, the instant her hand touches his head, he barks loudly, startling her. The story, he reveals, is a complete fabrication, leaving Francesca laughing at how easily she was duped. After a few drinks, David begins to fall asleep. Seizing the moment, Francesca quietly removes her shoes in preparation for another escape attempt. Her eyes stay fixed on him, as her trembling fingers reach into his pocket for the keys. Just as she begins to pull them out, though, the faint jingle of metal wakes him. Panicked, she decides to get up and run. However, her escape is short-lived, as he's able to restrain her quickly. The next morning, Francesca wakes from another nightmare. In the bathroom, she spots a bottle of David's medication with his name and address on the label. Seeing its potential value, she discreetly removes the label and hides it under her shirt. A day into Francesca's captivity, David brought her favorite foods and invited her to ask questions. Instead, she hurled insults, calling him mentally ill. Unfazed, David argued that someone truly ill wouldn't be treating her nicely. He then revealed he saw their situation as his version of a date, and reassured her that everything would work out in the end. To get Francesca to understand why he took her, David shared a bit of his background. He informed her that he was originally from England, studied in the US, and settled in Montreal for its European charm. He disclosed that he screened hundreds of women in that part of the city, believing it was home to smart, educated, self-sufficient singles. He then described creating a program to hack the phone systems of the women he identified, scanning conversations for traits he sought. Once Francesca was flagged, he meticulously researched her, including her family life, dating history, work, finances, medical records, and emails. Upon analyzing Francesca's records, David determined that they were 99.3% compatible. This near-perfect match was what ultimately drove him to abduct her. David then concluded by disclosing his plan to employ psychological techniques to make her fall in love with him. A few days into her captivity, David brings Francesca breakfast and a pen and paper, suggesting she list anything she needs. Once he leaves, however, she retrieves the hidden medicine label and uses the pen and paper to write a message explaining her situation, including David's full details. After she finishes, she hides the note in her shirt, silently planning how to get it outside. On Francesca's first day at David's place, she immediately searched for ways to get out after he untied her and left. However, her hopes were quickly dashed. David had meticulously planned every detail, going so far as to cover all the windows to prevent her from escaping or signaling for help. When David returns, he picks up the pad he left for Francesca to see what she had written. To his dismay, she filled it with nothing but sarcastic remarks. Still, he manages to joke about it before leaving again to buy what she needs. Back from the store, David instructs Francesca to wear the clothes he bought for their fourth date, an intimate dinner. Francesca then counters with a deal. She'll wear the dress and have dinner with him if he lets her step outside briefly for fresh air. David, however, refuses, calling it too risky. Nevertheless, he offers a compromise. He'll remove the wooden panel from one of the windows to let in some air, on the condition that he closely monitors her while she enjoys it. Although it's not what she wanted, Francesca ultimately agrees, believing it might still give her the chance to get her letter outside. After tying Francesca up following her first escape attempt, David released her once she calmed down. He told her to take a bath and put on a dress he'd chosen, saying it was for their mini-golf date later. Summoning her courage, Francesca warned him her family would come looking for her, but David dismissed the threat with chilling ease. He revealed he knew her father had abandoned her at 2. Her mother had died when she was 14, and she had no close family to notice her absence. David also pointed out that she'd told friends she was on a 2-week vacation in Europe, delaying any alarm over her disappearance. Adding to her dread, he exposed her false story about vacationing with a married man to avoid social pressure from her friends. David smugly noted how her lies created the perfect alibi, turning her attempts at solitude to his advantage. Francesca was left reeling, trapped by her own deception. While in the bathroom getting ready for their dinner date, Francesca quietly devises a plan to send out her plea for help. She breaks apart a candle, wraps her handwritten note around it, and secures it with a strip torn from her undergarment. Once finished, she hides the makeshift package inside her dress. Before removing one of the wooden panels as promised, David wraps a scarf around Francesca to shield her from the cold wind. To ensure she doesn't call for help, he tapes her mouth as well. As David works on opening the windows, Francesca carefully retrieves the hidden note from her dress. The moment the windows open, she tosses it outside in one swift motion, before he can notice. Unaware of what his captive just did, David enjoys the cool breeze and reflects on how crucial it is to share life with someone you're compatible with. He muses about how meaningless life would be without such a connection. His words clearly aimed at convincing Francesca to take a chance on him. During their dinner date, David invites Francesca to ask him anything. Instead of her usual insults, she surprises him by asking about his personal life. David admits he's never been married and shares a similar family history to hers. No siblings, an absent father, and a mother who passed away during his teenage years. When Francesca asks if their shared backgrounds influenced his choice, David acknowledges it as one of many reasons he sees them as compatible. Frustrated, she demands to know how long he plans to keep her. David then calmly reiterates his goal, to make her fall in love with him, confident their compatibility will eventually win her over. With biting sarcasm, Francesca mockingly declares her love for David and asks if she can leave now. She later challenges how he could ever be sure her feelings were real. David simply replies that they'll both know when the time comes. When she asks what happens if she never loves him, David confidently claims she will. He argues that their similarities and the time they'll be sharing make it practically a certainty. Francesca, however, insists there's still a chance she won't love him. In response, David reveals that in time, he'll give her the choice to stay or leave. When she warns she might report him to the authorities, he remains unfazed, saying it's a risk he's willing to take. Still puzzled by his plan, Francesca argues that if he truly believed they were compatible, he should have just asked her out. David then counters that she had shut herself off from every man who approached her, and that traditional dating wouldn't have worked. He adds that dating her first would have made him an obvious suspect if he'd later carried out his plan. When Francesca claims he's not even her type, David abruptly ends the conversation. To her shock, he starts preparing a bath for both of them. As he runs the water, she defiantly declares she'll never get in. However, faced with the grim alternative of being bound again, Francesca eventually steps into the bath with him. Once in the tub, David suddenly asks her about her first intimate experience. Taking offense to such a personal question, she refuses to share any details. David subsequently discloses that his first encounter was at the age of 21. Skeptical, Francesca accuses him of lying, remarking that someone like him shouldn't have had any trouble with women. David couldn't help but be thrilled at her comment, interpreting it as a compliment on his looks. However, Francesca is quick to reiterate that he's not her type. After bathing, David makes some popcorn. Curious but cautious, Francesca asks about their next activity, but David ignores her, focused on his own bowl. Irritated but resigned, she starts eating as well. Suddenly, he flicks a piece of popcorn at her. Without missing a beat, she retaliates with a handful. Grinning, David jokingly threatens to dump his entire bowl on her, prompting Francesca to raise hers in mock defense. True to his word, he eventually follows through on his threat. Though initially annoyed, she can't help but be amused by his playful, childlike behavior. The next day, for their 5th date, David brings out a guitar and announces they'll be singing together. He also admits he had installed listening devices in her shower and often heard her sing. Ignoring her outrage, David starts strumming her favorite song. Though off-key, his effort has an endearing charm that catches Francesca off guard, prompting a small, reluctant smile. When David playfully pretends to forget the lyrics, Francesca hesitates, but eventually sings along. As the words escape her, another faint smile slips through, almost as if she's starting to actually like him. In the early hours of the morning, Francesca wakes from another bad dream to find David sitting beside the bed, silently watching her. Her anxiety spikes as he climbs onto the bed, unsure what he's going to do next. However, he only adjusts her blanket, gently tucking her in before leaving the room without a word. For their 6th date, they share a quiet breakfast. Breaking the silence, Francesca asks why he didn't take advantage of her earlier. In response, David asserts he'd never do such a thing. Sensing an opening, she presses further, asking if he's tired of this twisted game and suggesting it might be time to let her go. David sidesteps her suggestion and pivots the conversation to analyze Francesca's past relationships. Overwhelmed and frustrated, Francesca finally snaps, yelling for him to stop playing games, force himself on her, and be done with it. But David continues to insist that's not his intent. Nonetheless, as her anger escalates, he finally gives in to her provocations. To his surprise, she doesn't resist. Instead, she surrenders, revealing through her actions and emotions that she has already developed feelings for him. As they lie in bed later that night, Francesca reflects on how bizarre their love story has been. David agrees with her, but also reiterates how he's always known his plan was going to work. The next morning, loud banging jolts Francesca and David awake. Moments later, police storm in with weapons drawn. Francesca realizes they must have found the note she threw out the window. As officers close in, David calmly professes his love for Francesca and declares he won't go to jail. He then orders her to step back and reaches for his gun. Panicked, Francesca pleads for him to stop, but he ignores her and points the weapon at the officers, prompting them to open fire. Believing they just killed David, Francesca screams and rushes to his side, sobbing as she confesses her love. To her shock, though, he suddenly starts talking. David then reveals that he staged the entire scene, hiring 2 crooked cops to act. After he dismisses the officers, he further elaborates his actions to Francesca. He discloses that he had intentionally left the medicine bottle with his information in the bathroom for her to find. He also provided the pen and paper, knowing she would use them to craft a plea for help. He adds that he knew she would have found a way to get it outside. It was all part of his meticulous design to make her realize that she truly loves him. David then adds that if Francesca had shown relief when he was shot, he would have stayed down and pretended to be dead. The 2 officers would have rescued her, and he would have vanished from her life forever. Stunned, Francesca could only lie back in silence. To lighten the mood, David cracks a joke, and they share a laugh about how twisted their relationship is. Shortly after, he excuses himself to clean up and grab food. Unbeknownst to Francesca, the man she's come to love is even sicker in the mind than she thinks. Downstairs, David unlocks a room. Inside, bound and gagged, sits another terrified woman, just as Francesca had been. With chilling calm, he proceeds to give the same speech he once delivered to Francesca about why he abducted her. David, it turns out, isn't really a man looking for love. Instead, he's nothing more than a psychopath who derives twisted pleasure from abducting women and manipulating them into falling for him, one victim after another.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.